Listen, right now we're also invested in celebrating Canadian culture. And yes, it's always been a little challenging for a Canadian movie to find its way to you. But I'll tell you this, it used to be easier. We are making some of the best movies this country's ever made. Why can't those movies find you? The group chat's here. Let's go. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Okay, let me tell you the occasion for this conversation. Today is National Canadian Film Day. It's an initiative that's been around for just about 10 years or so. And as you can guess by the name, it's a day to celebrate and think about Canadian film and how this country has contributed to cinema. But it hits a little different this year because it's landing in the middle of a federal election and the trade war and the annexation threats and also all these larger conversations about the meaning of being Canadian. Joining me now, we have Jesse Wente. Jesse's a veteran film critic and current chair of the Canada Council for the Arts. Sarah-Tai is a film critic and manager of programming at the Regent Park Film Festival. And Nathalie Younglai is a founder of the nonprofit advocacy group BIPOC TV and Film. Jesse, Sarah-Tai, Nathalie, welcome to the show, friends.
Hi.
Hello. Nice to have you here. Listen, Jesse, I'm going to start with you. At their best, just best case scenario, at their best, what do you think homegrown movies tell us about ourselves?
Yeah, well, I think, not just Canadian films, but any sort of national cinema, Elamin, usually has two primary functions. One is it's a window for the rest of the world into that place and the people that are there. And so it offers that opening for people to enter and sort of begin to understand. And then for us here, the locals, it's a mirror. It's really a mirror, and it gives us an opportunity to look at ourselves and reflect back some things about ourselves. Not always the best things, and not always the shiniest things, but certainly important. And I think that's very much, the history of Canadian cinema. And so I think given all of the elements you discussed off the top of the show, I think it might serve us very well in this moment.
Yeah, I think there's an element to which we look to culture and we look to film to maybe give us an alphabet to which we can like write our own story, if you will. At least that's my read on it. Sarah-Tai, you were just here last week talking about Village Keeper, which is nominated for Best Feature at this year's Canadian Screen Awards. What's your read on what homegrown movies tell us about ourselves?
I think in their best forms, sorry, I was just jarred by the sound of my voice following Jesse's sultry voice. Sorry, listeners.
You sound great.
It's a jump scare. I think in their best forms, they give us this chance to see a care for specificity in terms of like our hugely diverse spectrum of experiences and our histories and our stories. And then adding on to that, like not even just stories, but how we tell stories, how we share knowledge, how we live in relation to one another. They give us a chance to see a specific way of looking and moving through the world.
Nathalie, from your vantage point, what do you think at their best? What do homegrown movies do for us?
Yeah, I mean, it's really building on what Jesse and Sarah-Tai have said. It's really that like our stories matter and that we are not this white monolith that we have, seen in the past. We are more than we have seen on the big screen. And I think we're in this moment in time where we can finally see ourselves on screen and celebrate that.
Mm-hmm. I think there are certainly issues to talk about, and I want to get to those issues. But maybe on a celebratory note, maybe we'll start here. Jesse, we were talking before we went live, and you're like, there used to be a time when I saw 10,000 movies a year, and maybe you see slightly fewer than that now. But seeing as this is National Canadian Film Day, can you just give me a homegrown movie that has come out in the last maybe year or so that you're like, you know what, I think people should spend some time with this movie?
Well, sure, but just to quickly correct the misinformation that just occurred, it was 1,500.
Yeah,
1,500.
That's a lot, man. That's 3 a day. Like, anyway, yes, continue.
Yes, I was a film critic and programming a couple different film festivals at that time, and that's how you accumulate that. The film I most want to highlight is a fantastic documentary. Canadian cinema is very much rooted in the documentary tradition. That's where our national cinema actually comes from the founding of the National Film Board and the early days of this place, the CBC. Like that's sort of how it grew out of. And so I want to highlight Wilfred Buck. This is a fantastic documentary, sort of a biography of this Cree elder whose very well known in all Indigenous communities as being the Star Man is commonly how he would be referred to, because he has a deep understanding and knowledge of Cree astronomy and understanding of the stars in a very different way than we understand now. And this film takes you through, it melds science and humanity and time. It takes you through time. It takes you through literal space. Elamin, I think it's just a fantastic film, and the type of film that does exactly what I was suggesting earlier. I think it gives a window for a lot of the world, and for Canada, it gives a great opportunity to reflect on the knowledge systems that have existed here for thousands of years and that yet remain somewhat of an untapped resource for the Canada of today.
You're such a great salesman of a movie, Jesse, that I'm like, I'm going to abandon the rest of the show and go find this movie. Again, it's called Wilfred Buck is what it's called, you said?
Wilfred Buck. You undoubtedly find it on the National Film Board website would be where I'd start.
Deal. I'm on it. Sarah-Tai, over to you, pal. What do you want to recommend?
I'd like to second Wilfred Buck. It's a very lovely, lovely movie. Of course, I'd like to shout out Village Keeper again.
Yes.
Such a warm, spirited film worth watching as well. Something I watched very recently and enjoyed is Sukyin Lee's Paying for It, which is an adaptation of cartoonist Chester Brown's graphic novel of the same name. And the novel follows his decision to start frequenting sex workers after the breakup of his real-life relationship with Sukyin. And Sukyin is reimagined in the film as this character, Sunny. And it's this very nostalgic, zeitgeisty look at late 90s, early 2000s Toronto's arts and culture. You know, you get to see that transition of Much Music, which is called Max Music in the film, from this kind of zany DIY platform for punky kids into this kind of more mainstream space. It's really funny. It's really quotable. I laughed out loud, which is very difficult to do for me for a narrative film. But I think it's really fresh. I think it's really fresh. And I think Sukyin and co-writer Joanne Sarazin, they add a really amazing feminist perspective to Chester's story as well.
Two notes about Paying for It. One, friend of the show, Andrea Weirhun, is in that movie. She's absolutely incredible in it. And also, Chester Brown has a non-speaking cameo. He just kind of pops up and you go, hey, wait a minute, is that Chester Brown himself? And then you get really excited, and then he completely, 1 second later, kind of moves on. Nathalie, over to you, pal. What do you want to recommend?
Yeah, I'd love to highlight Lucky Strikes, which is a film by Darcy Wade. It's this hilarious Indigenous comedy starring Victoria Wendelin, Gabriel Daniels, and Meegwin Fairbrother. And it's about these two washed-up Indigenous bowlers trying to preserve his father's legacy by buying his late father's bowling alley. But first, they have to win this national bowling competition. And I think these like really fun and quirky stories about Indigenous communities are like really important for audiences who are Indigenous, but also non-Indigenous to alike. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say I love that recommendation. When I saw the poster for it, I was like, I need to sit with this movie. I need to figure out how to find this movie. And so you reminded me that I'm like, okay, make some time to go find it. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. It's National Canadian Film Day. Jesse Wente's here, Sarah-Tai Black is here, and Nathalie Younglai is here. Jesse, we are having this conversation in the middle of the election, as we mentioned earlier, but also in the middle of the trade war, in the middle of, annexation threats from the United States. Those political tensions are, translating to the way that we talk about culture and the way that we talk about the importance of supporting homegrown film in this country. What are you making of those conversations right now? And I'm asking this because you were on the show not that long ago when those threats started coming out, and you're like, we need to figure out how to protect culture in this country. And now it's been a couple of months. Are we any better at having those conversations?
I think we're progressing a little bit. I'm not sure we're fully there yet. And obviously there's a lot of stuff beyond the conversation that actually things need to happen without us just talking about it. But frankly, as someone who's been in the cultural sector and the Canadian film sector for my adult life, it's sort of one of those moments of I don't like how this came about at all, because you don't like these sorts of world events. Yeah. At the same time, boy, this feels like a long time coming where we've actually got Canadians interested in investing not only resources, but their time and attention, because we do all live in an attention economy, and it does matter what culture and what cultural productions or products we give our attention to. And I think when it comes to Canadian film, I think it's important for Canadians to understand where it comes from. And it distinctly comes from an idea to not be American film, to do something quite different than what, let's be honest, Hollywood and then the burgeoning sort of broadcast sector in the US, what they were intending to do and their sort of approach to storytelling, a little less than 100 or so years ago. Like, Canadian film was very distinctly founded, the National Film Board, to do projects that lay on the sort of fringes of what America was doing, really to tell the stories that wouldn't be told in an American system. That's why we sort of chose to do this. I think historically that has served us generally well. Of course, it's imperfect. Who am I, an Anishinaabe guy, here to tell you Canadian history is perfect? It ain't. But I think it does serve us well to remember those origins and to think about how we invest in our cultural expressions going forward, and maybe investing in that difference. That I think there's been a long time where Canadian culture was seeing this huge monolith that is American culture, was trying to seek how to be more like it. And I think maybe the real lesson of what the success, particularly the different eras in Canadian film history and moments of success, have almost entirely been out of the difference between what we make and what they make, and investing and maybe broadening that difference, looking at how we can expand that difference, not just beyond our cultural products, but into the culture itself. What are the systems where we can start to be different than them, not just express that? I think that would be, I think that's very encouraging if we could move in that direction.
Nathalie, two things stick out for me from Jesse's answer there. One is that there's an element which, rubber hits the road, both for the industry, but also for consumers. Like, we are seeing people say, I am choosing to go out of my way to find a Canadian film, even though it might not necessarily be as easily accessible to me. That choice is important because that choice is actually reliant on people. The people listening to this conversation right now have to actively make a choice and say, I'm going to go and seek out a Canadian film. That's number one. And I think that is happening, at least on a grander scale than we've seen in a little while. And there's a comfort to be found in that. But then two, that larger point that Jesse just made, which is the idea that in this country, the biggest successes we've had, the most interesting things we've made, have been out of moments where we say, what's the thing that is ours that is not American? Instead of, sort of getting stuck in this idea of how do we make the thing that the US made, but differently in here. So this is when it comes to speaking of supporting our homegrown film industry. What does that look like from your vantage point? What does that support actually look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of in this great moment where people are showing pride in homegrown films.
Yeah.
And it's this pride that we haven't really felt before. And it's amazing. There's a lot of times where people are ashamed or don't even know about Canadian films. And so for me, what support looks like on the industry side is increasing funding for marketing budgets as well, increasing access to screens, and increasing access to funds for BIPOC filmmakers. And then on the audience side, it is exactly that, putting your money, showing with your money how you support, go see the Canadian films, watch the programming, show up and build that audience. And if I could also just say the same thing for Canadian TV, because a lot of talent who work on film and a lot of talent and crew who work on film and create film are the same people who work in TV. And we have the same issue where we need to celebrate the Canadian TV that we are making. And so if I could just hijack the panel and recommend a TV show,
Yeah.
I'd love to recommend a comedy called Don't Even. It's created by Amber Segoen Daniels.
Yes.
It's this funny, really heartfelt coming of age story that follows two high school best friends in the late 90s Winnipeg as they try to figure out what's next in life.
First of all, I've watched the pilot of Don't Even. I'm just like completely fallen in love with that show and have not returned to it since. And so thank you for that reminder. But second of all, I want to pick up on this point that you mentioned, this idea of access to screens, because I think that's really important. Because if you are currently, say you're in my hometown of Kingston, Ontario, Sarah-Tai, you have the screening room, which is the independent film, independent cinema that's downtown. And then you got a couple of big chains that are not necessarily as interested in making the screens as accessible for Canadian films. They don't necessarily make those choices. You're currently the manager of programming at the Regent Park Film Festival here in Toronto. What do you think local festivals like Regent Park do to add to the fabric of Canadian film culture that isn't necessarily served by the bigger film festivals like TIFF or like Vancouver? Because access to screens comes kind of through those local smaller festivals.
Well, my first point is going to be a major read because I think it's so important and it's at the core of what we do. And that is paying artists for their time and their labor. I think that personally, myself and as an organization, we are very much against art for art's sake. We don't think that filmmakers should show up with their film and be depleted of resources after all the work of that. We don't think that artists are these omnipotent givers who just toss out their work and deserve nothing back. And you would be really shocked to see how many big festivals do not pay screening fees, do not pay for Q&A talkbacks. It's really shocking, especially since we're a very small festival, but we do the work of being able to compensate people equitably. And that makes a huge amount of difference, especially when you consider the fact that our lineup is 97% racialized artists. A lot of those folks are emerging racialized filmmakers. A lot of those folks are people who aren't necessarily being supported by grants. And if they are, they're not huge grants. And supporting the filmmakers allows you to support the future work that they're going to be doing, which gives us that hyper-local focus on stories coming out of this country, coming out of communities like Regent Park that are systematically made marginalized and maybe not seen on screen as much as we see other Canadian stories.
All right. Any obstacles to that work that you see? Any sort of major
funding?
Okay.
Funding. Elamin, the tariffs.
It's the money.
Funding.
It's the money.
It's always the money.
I like that. There's no other way to put it. I mean, there is.
Yeah.
You have to have the ability to fund this work in order to do it. And we just are a smaller market. And with that, someone's got to look around and go where is that money going to come from? And
especially if you want to pay the people who are working at the festival equitably, again, not just exploiting people for the sake of art. And alongside that, keeping things free and accessible. We have a free festival. We offer free childcare. All of our income, the majority of our income, I'm not the ED, okay?
Yep.
The majority of our income comes from fundraising, and we use the majority of our income to remove those barriers for participation, for attendance. There are folks who can't afford to go to TIFF. There are folks who can't afford to go to these other big film festivals. So for a lot of folks, this is maybe one of the few opportunities where seeing Canadian stories on screen is actually accessible, and they're able to take part in the city's cultural landscape.
Well, Nathalie, if I can go to you on this, because one of the ongoing challenges for Canadian films, particularly ones that center BIPOC communities and BIPOC stories, is getting those movies actually seen by the communities that inspire them in the first place. Can you talk a little bit about those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, it's super challenging. It's practically impossible to get a film to play in one of these big box theaters, much less, multiple theaters across this huge country. And, a distributor might get a limited run in a small handful of local theaters for one weekend. And so if you don't live near that big city, or if you don't live near that particular community, you're not going to see it. And you might miss, I think it's amazing, what Regent Park does is amazing, and all the small film festivals.
You're just saying that because Sarah-Tai is here, but I take
No. I love Regent Park. But I think, if you can't get out that one night that movie is playing, or the one or two times, then you miss it. And how do we grow our audience, and how do we grow the appreciation for what the kind of films that we do here if we can't get an audience? And so sometimes even getting a film into a theater means a filmmaker has to pay or rent a theater to put on their own screening and get it seen by their community. And how do you get to the wider audience? And it's always at a loss.
The idea of making a movie that is a love letter and about a particular community, well, not necessarily a love letter, but just a movie that is about a certain community, then needing to pay in order to show that community your work, that seems broken to me, but also, Natalie, if I may invoke the S word, which is maybe not the most popular word around here, but streaming might be an option here. Like there's, I am someone who believes that movie theaters are cathedrals, you know what I mean? But also, if you need to get a movie seen by people, streaming does have a role to play. What's streaming's role here, Natalie?
Yeah, I think bottom line is if we want to get our homegrown films seen by as many Canadians as possible, not just those who live in like Toronto or Vancouver,
Yeah.
but like smaller communities, northern communities, rural communities, the most practical solution is streaming. And it's accessible, it's affordable to most people, it can reach like a wider audience. And so we need to give films a chance to grow this huge fan and audience base that it deserves.
Jesse, I'm well aware that there's somebody listening to this conversation who says, "Gosh, Elamin, you proposing streaming as one of the solutions. How parochial is that?" Because of course it's one of the solutions that are available here. But there is something to be said about trying to preserve the sanctity of the movie theater, but also something on a higher level, the communal presence of actually like watching movies together, because I think that is how a movie's profile tends to grow. And I'm not seeking to be particularly parochial about this, but also I think I'm maybe trying to solve this problem in an old-fashioned way. And we should say that in this country, films that we put out have we've struggled to put out films that have like a wide sort of commercial appeal. That's not really the kind of cinema that we produce in this country. And tied up in that is that like we don't really have the same kind of like celebrity star system that the United States has. So I'm curious, what do you make of this? How do we sort of grow the profile of Canadian movies when we don't necessarily have the same levers to pull as American movies do?
Yeah, well, we don't have the same levers in terms of population size and budget size. Like that's quite obvious. Market size, we don't have that. I think in English Canada, I would distinguish. They do have a star system in Quebec.
Very well established star system in Quebec.
And they go watch their movies in Quebec.
They do.
So movies can do financially very well in Quebec if they speak to that audience.
Yeah.
I think it might be high time for English Canada to figure that part out because I think part of the challenge is we don't have a star system. And I'm not sure I can find a point in time where we really tried to have one, where we actually aligned some of the different institutions and cultural organizations that we have that actually, because I think one of the challenges, Elamin, to be completely blunt, is that a lot of the larger cultural institutions, and just any size cultural institutions in Canada, tend to be competitive as opposed to not necessarily working together. And you need to sort of have some work together to build a star system. Like you need the talent to make a movie, but then appear on TV, to appear on radio, to appear in like, so you need everyone to sort of, and that's what happens in Quebec, right? Like if a film star or an artist, they appear on the chat show, they're on the radio, like they're everywhere as something. We don't do that in English Canada. And I think we should long past start to figure out how we can actually do that. To your other point, I'm sure I'm the oldest person on this panel at this moment. So of course I'm a big fan of in-person. I understand streaming is a viable thing. I just think some films, like comedies, will always work better in a crowd. Yeah. Because then other people are laughing. It gives you permission to laugh. And so I think, and I think there could be a project nationally where we could devise policy that would allow independent local theaters to reemerge. So a lot of those spaces still exist. They might be moribund or in trouble, but all the small towns used to have a movie theater. We could figure out how to do that. That might involve even expanding what a movie theater is in terms of like the actual space that we're involving in, what that looks like, the revenue structure, like how all of that. These are all things. And I think in this moment, it would be wise for all Canadian policy makers to think, maybe we should start to do different things. Like maybe we should really open up to what the possibilities are and maybe actually flex some of the more power or like because I think too often, especially in the wake of America, we can feel like we need to shrink.
Yeah.
And this is a moment where I think Canadians, and take this from an Anishinaabe guy, we don't shrink in the face of colonial threats. You do the opposite.
You do the opposite.
You stand tall. You wear the beads. You do the whole thing because you're not letting them sideline you. And so let's do that. Like, let's invest. Let's, as opposed to just protecting, let's build. Let's grow. I think this is a moment where we should be thinking about the Canada we truly could be and starting to build that and sort of go, with the States.
Yeah,
they're on a different path. Let's choose our path.
I think that's actually, we're literally about to run out of time. So I just want to say I appreciate this conversation. You guys have been terrific. Thanks again. Thank you so much. My name is Elamin. This is Commotion. We'll be back tomorrow.